Welcome to Earth 2.0. I'm Anita Casalina. In our search for ways to create a more sustainable and peaceful world, we see that we need to bring our planet into new balance. That means building a society where everyone has equal access to education, income, housing, food, healthcare, and water. These are big issues to tackle, and every community is unique with different needs. So working at a local level is often the most practical approach. Our guest, Robbie Powelson, is with a group called the Alliance for Equitable Community Restructuring. And this alliance is proving to be a great model for other communities. Hi, Robbie. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Tell me about, because I know people are going to really want to hear about restructuring, the Alliance for Equitable Community Restructuring.
Right. So the basic concept behind AKER is about how do we bring the idea of equity, how do we break barriers to exclusion, segregation in communities like Marin County, in communities that are very white, have a high level of affluence, and it's trying to bring the activism that we see and bring it within those types of communities and bringing it inwards. How can we actually make those communities more equitable?
Tell us about Marin County, because I think that a lot of people don't know too much about that. What's the structure now in Marin County in terms of income, housing, resources? What would you say?
Right. So Marin County, in a recent report, was ranked #1 among all counties in California as having the highest level of racial inequity. We have some of the highest levels of socioeconomic inequality anywhere. I grew up in Corte Madera,
which is a town in
which
Marin.
is a town in Marin, and I got that in spades growing up. Within the groups of people I was a part of, feeling like we were left out from our surrounding community. I feel like within communities like this, there's these cracks and these holes where light comes in, where people who have been pushed aside can come up and bring a new vision of how these communities exist, not as these exclusive places where property values are being shot up the roof, restrictive zoning is excluding people from coming in. There's just so much pain that is invisible in these places that we want to bring up and bring attention to.
So, what kinds of barriers? This is something I think a lot of people aren't aware of, that there are actually ways in which wealthy communities can legally structure themselves that keep out people who they consider to be undesirable or unacceptable or something like that.
That's right. Well, so big parts of what I've come to see, the inequity I've seen in my community has really been driven by local politicians getting sucked into these structures of incentives where basically they're beholden to the material desires of
the wealthy people.
Of wealthy people.
Because they donate huge amounts of money to their campaigns, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That happens on a national level too, as you know.
Absolutely. So I think within these types of communities in particular, I think in places like Marin County where the segregation is exceptional, it's unusually it's unusually exclusive. I actually think that the state needs to start coming in, and there actually has to be a withholding of power from communities that have demonstrated that they support exclusionary zoning practices, that they're against affordable housing, that they're not for bringing down these barriers, that there actually needs to be greater controls put upon them.
They need somebody to oversee. They need a larger government to oversee what they're doing locally.
That's
is
right.
What you're saying. Because I live in Sausalito, so you and I both live in Marin County, and I have seen these inequities for years and years. And by living in Sausalito, we had a very embarrassing thing happen where the Attorney General of the state of California, Javier Becerra, he discovered that all of the resources for Sausalito to the school district were going into the wealthy white school. And the city of Marin City, which is very close to where I live, where it's almost exclusively African American, Black Americans living there, they were getting very little. They had very little resources ever funneled into their school. And it became a national news story that Sausalito had that kind of segregation. It was really shocking to some of us to find that out.
The thing that people don't understand is that, we talk about Marin County as a bubble, but that's actually an inaccurate way of putting it. Marin County is related and structured to racism. Without the deep racism and the deep inequality that's has manifested in Marin County, we wouldn't see it the way it is now. And with Sausalito in particular, right now on the Richardson Bay anchorage, there's a tremendous amount of police violence against people who live in boats. The Richardson Bay Regional Agency right now has taken a very hard tack to the anchor out community, which are a community that's contributed incredibly to the culture of Marin County and Sausalito.
And to the economy too.
Right.
It's a fairly large community of people who can't afford the rents or the mortgages of Marin County, and they live on their boats out in Richardson Bay, which keeps them from being homeless, and they still contribute to the economy. I mean, I've been in restaurants and seen people rowing to shore. They buy their coffee, they buy their bagels, they shop, and then they go back to their boats. So they are still supposed to be considered citizens of Marin County, and they're just, the wealthy communities that surround that bay really look at them with great disdain, I believe.
That's right. Belvedere and Sausalito right now are the two primary constituencies that have been advocating for the very violent campaign of destroying people's homes, straight up, stealing people's boats, crushing them in the same day, with very often without proper warning. And really, it's just part and parcel to what we see in Marin County is that this kind of issues get swept under the rug again and again.
Right. It's that's not the way that we read the news. If you read the Marin Independent Journal, it's often just about, these boats are polluting the bay and we need to get rid of the boats. And you don't really hear about, these are human stories. These are stories about people who live here.
That's right. That's a huge part of it. The big issue, I've seen so much sadness and so much resilience in Marin County that you never see because we live in a media vacuum where the only media that's coming in has been for a very long time. The only has been a very conservative outlook on things. It doesn't go deeply, and we haven't been able to build that solidarity across different counties in places that have stronger networks of activists, stronger networks of legal support, things that are really necessary for lots of people. But because we don't have that social justice infrastructure in Marin County, there are thousands of stories of people who are going through hard times that are just getting swept under the rug again and again. And there's communities like Marin County all over, people struggling all over the United States like this, and I feel we can do a lot.
I feel that this is in some ways a community that can show best practices from activism that, there's a lot to push back against, but I'm really feeling how alive the activism is becoming in Marin County. Mm-hmm. What are your goals, and how do you intend to get there? I know one of them is to divert some of the funding from the police and the Sheriff's Department into community-based services, as well as, health, mental health, and emotional well-being for people. So tell us more about that and how you plan on going about doing that.
Yeah, so with the TAM Equity campaign, what we're really pushing right now is, we're taking the large national conversation around defund the police seriously, but what I think it's important for people to understand is that we're not just defunding the police, we're reinvesting that money into the community, and we're reinvesting that into public safety and public health. And I think that it's important that as we discuss about, reducing our over-reliance on police, that there's actually programs that are already working, like mobile behavioral health crisis teams, that respond much more sensitively to what often police officers have to respond to. There's so much room for those kinds of programs to be invested in right now, because at this point, in Marin County, I mean, we have 5 people, it's a very modest budget.
What's the response you've gotten from the police or the sheriff's department or the public at large when you talk about reallocating resources?
Well, I think, it's interesting. I think the police at this time, I've actually heard police talk about being interested in letting go of some of those responsibilities. I'd actually think that I believe that there's an acknowledgement of the effectiveness of crisis intervention, because it's really not a comfortable situation for police either.
Not something they've been trained to do.
Exactly,
yeah.
Right. So I think now the sensitive part is that, and I think where we're going to be getting pushback is that, we're going through budget reductions right now. And, the truth is that you only have so much money, and that but I believe if we make the point that these services are in fact, stepping in place of where originally money from police departments were going, I think we can make a case that this is a good reinvestment of our money.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us and describing this to us in great detail today, because this is something that nationally is going to be looked at in communities all over the country. And I think we do need some real working models to see how to make this happen and how to be successful as part of shifting the world that we're in right now, and not leaving people out, not having those holes that people fall through. So thanks so much, Robbie. It's good to have you with us today.
Thank you, Anita. Appreciate it.